I saw a quote the other day. I keep mentioning Donnie Gay. He said it took him a long time to understand that when somebody's telling you something to make you better, they're not criticizing you. He said it took me a long time to learn that. And I read that again and again, and I thought, that's great, because your initial reaction was, how dare you? This is my deal. But no, they're telling you to make you better. And I had people in my rodeo career do that, and I thought early on that they were just knocking me. But they weren't. They were wanting me to be better.
This is Beyond the Chutes is presented by Parasite System and their complete all-in-one site AI, the complete testing solution. From hooves to paws, we test them all. Today we're going to go back to the Texas Swing, where we recorded sitting in a place that I can only describe as a holy grail for rodeo people. It's called the Buckhorn, Kelly Clark's home-built museum of a life in rodeo. When I walked in, I was overwhelmed. Yeah, in the best way. Championship saddles, walls covered in photos, a map of the United States with every place Kelly's competed, plus enough real rodeo history in this room to keep a storyteller busy for the next decade. Now, a lot of you know Kelly Clark as a competitor and a promoter, but what you're going to hear today is something deeper. Kelly's a rodeo historian in boots. A guy who didn't just live it, he kept it, studied it, and can still tell you why it mattered. Now, this is the first of our conversations with Kelly, and we're doing it the right way. We're starting at the beginning. The Clark family, his dad, and more importantly, the ethos. How he was raised, how he carried himself, and how he earns respect. The road and the reality behind the buckles. So settle in, because this isn't just a rodeo interview. This is a piece of rodeo memory. We are sitting here with Kelly Clark. I am in the Buckhorn, and I got to tell you, when I walked in this place, overwhelmed. Overwhelmed is the best word I got, in a good way, So much memorabilia. All the walls are covered, the championship saddles and the map of the United States and every place that Kelly has competed with pictures from those states. Just incredible. And of course, Buckhorns, because we've got deer antlers that are all up the balusters, I guess, if you will. The handrails up above on the second story. And he's got plans to make this larger yet. And I think, and I said this to Kelly when I walked in, we could talk about any 1 square 4-foot section of this and probably put together 2 or 3 shows out of just that one section. So welcome to Beyond the Chutes, Mr. Kelly Clark.
Thank you a lot. I've seen this numerous times. I'm honored to be on here, and I appreciate getting to tell our story about it. We've got a lot of history in professional rodeo and just rodeo in general, and we love it so much that we just keep doing it.
And for our listeners, I saw it in action yesterday. I was in Wiley, Texas, at the bull riding up there. 17th year they've been doing that bull riding rodeo, pro rodeo, and we'll let Kelly talk a little bit about how that's all evolved. But that's going to be like chapter 7 or 10 or 12, Kelly. I think there's a lot of ground to cover between here and there. So I like to start at the beginning.
Yeah.
And the Clark family, and go back centuries.
So 1955, my dad went to the rodeo with his dad, my grandpa, and they watched the rodeo, and my dad said, hey, I can do that. And the Clark family's always been, you can't just say something, you got to get out and do it. And I'll come back to that here in a little while when we get back to my story, but my dad said he could do that, and so my grandfather went and bought him 5 horses, bucking horses. And he got on those, and when he got to where he could ride one of those, he'd sell that horse and buy another one that he couldn't ride. And he got to where he could ride those horses. So he started out, he rode bucking horses for about 3 years before he ever got into bull riding. And as we all know, he's one of the greatest bull riders ever, Bull Riding Hall of Fame, all the Hall of Fames. And actually, Dad's in 5 different Hall of Fames. And started out riding bucking horses and then went into the bull riding and just dominated it for about 10 years. He dominated all around it, everywhere he was, regionally, and then of course moving into the IRA and forward from that. And he tried to go to the RCA, and it was just a deal where they said, hey, you got to get in and go with somebody else. And he said, no, I really don't need to. And he said, come to find out, I really needed to. So he found a home in the IRA and got in it. 1964 was the world champion all around Cowboy. Bull riding world champion as well. Was runner-up to the bareback riding world champion, to the great Ben Jordan, by $6.40. Was runner-up world champion bareback rider. Then next year, actually, him and Davey Pruder was traveling down the road, and Davey said, hey, do you know you're leading in the world championship? And he said, man, I had no idea. And so really focused hard on trying to stay and win the world championships. He said the next year he set a goal out to win the world championship. He said it's the hardest thing he ever done in his life, because when you were just rodeoing and doing it, you wasn't thinking about it. He said it's the hardest thing he ever done in his life, try to win the world championship. And I don't think a lot of the guys that dabble in rodeo understand how difficult it is to be the world champion, or to be able to do it, to run up and down the road and do it like we do, because it is a lifestyle, very much so. And Dad came up through the ranks of the IRA, stayed over in there. I never really, growing up, knew much about the RCA at all, because I just went to rodeos with Dad in the IRA. When I got up and it was my time to ride, I knew all the secretaries, I knew all the stock contractors just from growing up in it. And so I never really ventured over into any other associations other than regional associations. But if we go all the way back, the IRA had a meeting in Chicago. So it was the Interstate Rodeo Association. When Chuck and them started it in 1957 is when it started. They crowned world champions in 57. Then it had about a 2 or 3 year hiatus where they just didn't have it together. Started back again in 1960 and went from there forward. But it was originally made to organize the regional associations, all the state associations and all that, to regionalize them. And we did that for a while, where we co-sanctioned with all the regional associations, which made the rodeos bigger. And so it rocked on there for a while like that. But I think, as in anything, if you lose focus of how you were created or what you were created for, if you get away from that, then you're no longer that. And I think the IRA did that through the years. They began to want to be a standalone deal. I know for years we wanted to go head-to-head with the RCA. The RCA refused to do that. They had everything to lose and nothing to gain. And I'll tell you, in the 1970s, they had a lot to lose, because we had some really great cowboys come through there about that time. And head-to-head, it would have been something. But the finals, I'll give you the example of it. The finals was started at the convention. So what they would do is they had a convention every year. They'd give away the World Championship awards, and they would have all the committees come in, and they would have committee meetings. So the association's only as strong or as good as your committees are, as good as strong as your rodeos are. So we need to fortify the committees. I became president in 1999, and I called some of Dad's friends, my old friends, older friends, not to say old, but older friends, and I went and met with them, and I said, what do we need to do to make this association to the greatness that we're aspiring to be? And they said, well, we got away from what we originally started doing. So what they did was they had the convention all day back in the day, and they had nothing to do at night. So they said, let's put on a rodeo. So I don't know if everybody's aware, but the IRA puts on one rodeo a year, and that's the International Finals Rodeo. So they put on this rodeo every year. So what happened was we got away from the convention part of it and went heavy on the rodeo part of it. And so we got away from doing what we were originally doing. When I became president, I reinstituted convention as far as having committees. I called friends of mine that were specialty in awards and insurance and all the things like that to get the committees more fortified and bring them up to, again, we're only as good as our committees are. So that's what I wanted to do with the association. Back to my dad, though, an icon in the sport, again, though he never crossed lines with the RCA or IRA lines, well respected in the RCA. They knew who he was. Very good friends of his was Larry Mahan and Jim Shoulders and his peers that knew who he was and the talent that he had. And if anybody was at the Bull Riding Hall of Fame when Dad was inducted, we've been doing this sport for 140 years. There's one guy that is the greatest bull rider in the 140-year history, and that's Donnie Gay. Donnie Gay said that he idolized my dad. The reason that his hat styles was the way they were was from that guy right there. He said in 1971 he saw a picture of a guy, had a cigarette and a roll brim hat, and he said it was John Clark, and he said I wanted everything I could do to be him. And so through the years, like I said, Donnie said that's who he thought was the greatest cowboy. So, and that's in good company with Donnie's dad and Jim Shoulders, who mentored him. So my dad had an illustrious career, great career through rodeo, and because of that, I just segued into it. You know, I know people in the cities, they're like, you know, how'd you get into rodeo? We rode calves. We did stuff that was, it wasn't anything out of the normal for us because that's what we did. My mom rode cutting horses, and so when they'd get done cutting, they'd run some in the chute. You know, we was usually at an old rodeo arena or something. They'd run some in the chute, and my brother and I would get on calves, scared to death, and they'd just wipe us out, and we'd get up being cowboys, you know. So it's kind of how I got started in it, and that's just what I wanted to do. I wanted to be just like my dad. And Wes Ward, who you just had a talk with yesterday, he and I did a podcast about a year ago, and they were doing the same thing. They was asking me about how my career got started, and Wes just interrupted. He stepped right in the middle of it, and he said, hang on, let me tell you something. This guy spent his rodeo career in a huge shadow. And I went, wow, okay, that's a good point, Wes. But I know people looked at me and wanted me to be dad, and there was no way I was going to be because nobody was. But through it all, I had a great rodeo career. You came into the Buckhorn here and saw that I kind of got my piece of the pie out of it myself. So real happy with it, and we continue to do rodeo today. Our rendition of it, like I said, my son taught me something. He was a stellar athlete, played football all the way through college, and he said, Dad, if you love something, you'll figure out a way to be around it. And I just love riding bulls, so 17 years ago, we started putting on bull ridings, and it developed into quite a big deal. We do about 10 shows a year, and it's all portable, and I know back east they do this every day, but over here we got permanent arenas everywhere, but we go where there's no arenas. We do a public beach, and we do some city parks mainly, and then as you saw yesterday, we did one on a church parking lot. And so it's something that we've developed over the years. We're still involved with it. We still promoting the sport that I love, and I want to do that. When I got involved in rodeo, I wanted rodeo to be better for my kids than it was for me. And it was better for me than it was for my dad. And so as it has evolved over the years, of course, money's the big deal. Excuse me, money's the big deal that we've looked at. But I don't know that money's a terrible judging marker. It's just terrible measuring stick. It's not all about the money. You know, it's about the experiences and time. The money was usually spent before we got home. I cherish the buckles and saddles and stuff that I have here. And like I said, I collected everything and kept it, and that's what the Buckhorn here is about. You heard about the Buckhorn before you ever got down here.
Yes.
I'm thrilled that it was more overwhelming when you got here than it was what you'd heard about it.
Yeah.
You had told me when you called me, you said, I've got to come see the Buckhorn.
Yeah.
And so the Buckhorn is the deal. We'll hopefully have some pictures up of it. But we built a man cave in my backyard, and we started building it, and it just kind of kept evolving. And then it was kind of to put out all of my rodeo memorabilia. And then I started getting rodeo history as Doug went through with me and saw of quite a bit of rodeo history here. And not just my dad's stuff or my stuff, but even way back into the 20s, 1920s, the one before this last one. And I love rodeo, and I want to promote rodeo and do all that I can for it. It's 1,000 times better today than it's ever been, money-wise. Now, like I said, we're not the same. I saw a picture of Rocker Steiner laying on the floor in the jet that they were traveling to, trying to get some sleep, going from rodeo to rodeo. We're not the same. We slept in the front seat of a truck or under a bed of a camper shell or whatever, traveling down the road. It's much better today than it has been, and that was my goal, was to make how can I get in and make rodeo better than it was before I got here? And I hope that's what everybody wants to leave the mark of, is not me come in and make my mark, but how do I make it better than what it was when I got here? So that's kind of where I'm at with rodeo.
I love it. I love it. And talk about, just because it keeps catching my attention, this corner behind us, just to show kind of the history, Kelly. Step us through just this corner. What would you call this corner? So it's immediately to your right when you come in the main door, to give kind of a guided tour. Talk about this and the memories and everything that it evokes for you as you look at this stuff.
So you're very distracted in here.
I am.
You keep looking at all the stuff on the walls.
I am. I do.
Just sitting here where Doug and I are at right now, right straight behind me are several saddles here. There's a saddle of mine. I won the Texas State Champion. There's a PRCA saddle here that I won for the Pepsi Challenge. And then one of my dad's world saddles is sitting here, his 1965 all-around world saddle. And then what Doug's really taken back by is I have a hat that belonged to Tom Mix, the silent movie star, back in the 20s, not this last one, but the 100 years ago. That's Tom Mix's hat that Dad got from Charlie Jackson, a famous cowboy. And then there's several Hall of Fame plaques on the wall, a couple of my dad's Hall of Fames and a couple of my Hall of Fame plaques on the wall. And again, just stuff that means stuff to us, and people come in and see it, and again, it means stuff to other people. So upstairs, my kind of centerpiece that I have is I have Gene Autry's Sheps. And for those of you who don't know, Gene Autry was famous singing cowboy, but he ended up owning the baseball team in California. If you don't know who Gene Autry was, you do know him. He sang Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty the Snowman. But Gene Autry, the Cowboy Turtle Association was the original organized rodeo association. I heard a guy tell me last week that it was the Cowboy Turtles Association. What did he tell me? It was false, but he told me, and I didn't correct him. He told me that, it was the Cowboys Turtle Association because it moved slow. Oh. And that's not what the Cowboy Turtle Association was about. It was because only the turtle that sticks his neck out gets anywhere. I see. That's why it was the Cowboy Turtle Association.
Really? Yeah. Really? I did not know
and
that.
So in the late 30s, in 1938, it was still the Cowboy Turtle Association. In 1940, it became the RCA, Rodeo Cowboys Association. And I'm getting to the history of the IRA as we move forward. So in 1940, Gene Autry had a rodeo company, and they would meet in Dublin, Texas. They built a huge complex there and had a big rodeo there. Got contestants from all over the nation. They came here and had a big rodeo. They put all the livestock, horses, everything on a train, and they went to Burwell, Nebraska. They had a whistle stop at Burwell, Nebraska, let all the animals off to just rest up a little bit. And the Burwell Pro Rodeo that is still going today was originated from that whistle stop. They put everything back on there. They went to Chicago, left from Chicago, went to New York to Madison Square Garden, and then up to Boston Garden where they had the World Championships back in the 30s. So Gene Autry was one of the original producers. So him and a guy named Colburn partnered up. They bought a ranch in Colorado, huge ranch, 20,000 acres, and they got this one guy that ended up being their livestock manager, and they put him on that ranch up there. He eventually got the rodeo company, and his name was Harry Knight, who had the famous bucking horses of 5 Minutes to Midnight and all those horses, Midnight. So the rodeo history went from there in the 40s and 50s, 60s. When we got to the 50s, late 50s, Chuck Smith and some guys from Oklahoma began to organize the International Pro Rodeo Association, is what we know of it today. It started out the Interstate Rodeo Association because they were trying to link the states up together. Again, what they did was there were regional associations in every state. I've always claimed if you could win in Texas, you could win anywhere. Texas was pretty stinking tough, still is today. We have more world champions that come out of here than anywhere in any association. And so they were trying to link up the associations. We had the Central Regional Cowboys Association here. My dad was a champ of it several times. But the Florida had one and Oklahoma had one. I mean, several of them all around. So the IRA tried to link those up. If you remember the days of co-sanctioning rodeos, that's what they were doing, was trying to bring all those together in an organized fashion to make a bigger body of association to combat the other one that if you didn't want to go to it or couldn't go to it. I refer to the regional guys as weekend warriors. They got a job, they got to stay home, and they just got to be there, but they can still rodeo. Not to say they were any less talented than anybody else, by no means, but that's just the route they chose to go. So the IRA tried to do that. Interstate Rodeo Association, they started in '57. They awarded champions that they went back and called world champions. It took a hiatus for about 3 years and then started again in 1960 and has been ever since 1960 on. In 1963, they were still Interstate Rodeo Association. They changed to International Rodeo Association in 1964, the first year my dad won the world champion all-around. So he was the first International Rodeo Association champion. So went from there, the PRCA, I think in 1974, went to the Pro Rodeo Cowboys Association, and in the early 80s, the IRA followed and went to International Pro Rodeo Association. So that's how we got to current Rodeo Association stuff. Lots of stories about how it began and how it did, and I would almost refer it to like the four Gospels. You get different accounts from different guys of where it happened and how it all worked and who stood up first and who said what, but you had a bunch of pioneer guys that loved rodeo and that wanted it better, wanted the recognition of the talent that was around them. And I think that's very important. It wasn't for them, it was for the talent that was around them. And it also, it bred in talent, so it brought talent in that they didn't have before. Like I said, in the late 60s, early 70s, the IRA was just sock full of talent. Just, again, you could go down the list and go, okay, who can ride as good as that guy? And world class in any association wherever. And by the way, the Cowboys know each other. It doesn't matter what card you held. The Cowboys know what the talent is, and I respect that part of it. I guess maybe the upper echelon or whoever it is wants to have boundary lines and say, if you're not in our association, you're not a pro. I think that's asinine, to be polite. We rode bulls for, $200-300 that the next week was in another association that they were riding for $2,000. It was the same livestock. When Dad got put in the Bull Riding Hall of Fame, Donnie Gay said that the respect of this, they don't know an I from a P. They just know the talent. Mm-hmm. And I respect that. Like Donnie said, bulls can't read your buckle. Just got to do it, So anyway, I think that the way rodeo has evolved through the years, and again, we have to use the RCA as the measuring stick for where we're going, IRA or whoever, because again, we're trying to fortify the committees to make the rodeos better. It's going to entice the talent to come over and do. So it's a vicious cycle that we go through. I don't know that we've done that at the best of our ability. The most corrupt association of any kind in the world is high school rodeo. Because what happens is a group gets in there and they do their own thing. You take your kid there, your kid begins to get maybe not treated as fairly as some of the other kids. You run for an official, but by the time you get a name known, your kid's out of it and you don't want to mess with the deal and you go on and that same corrupt system stays in there. I don't want that to be like that in professional rodeo. I think the cream should always rise to the top, and I think for the most part it does. I know back in the day they were probably pressed down. I think so. Like I said, I think my dad was probably one of the most talented to ever do it, and he was kind of denied in the other associations, so he just made a living in the IRA and made us a good living. My mom said when Dad was a world champion, we lived like kings. The first year my dad won the world all-around champion, he won $6,600. That's zero money right now to look at. You can win that in one deal, but a new car costs $2,500, a brand new car. So Mom said we lived like kings when Dad was the champ. And so though he was not in the other association, he was in the IRA, and we had a good living, a real good living. So in 1985, a guy sued the RCA and made it to where it opened up so everybody could do. And so my crew always just had every regional association card you could have. When I retired, I was third in the world in Canada. So we just went, because at the end of the year you could go to all those regional finals. And so that's kind of how I did my careers. I kind of went everywhere, not really a focus on one deal. And so generally, and my wife could attest to it, is if I won some money in Nebraska this weekend, we were going back to Nebraska that next weekend because they were liking me and I was liking them, and it might be Florida the next week or whatever. So we just kind of went all over. And again, we eked out I want to say a living, but it was a lifestyle. And we ended up, God blessed us immensely, and we ended up in a pretty nice little ranch, and I paid my ranch off and hung my bull rope up. And so, again, a very pleasant career. I told my wife I won all I could win, and she said, just how many more buckles do we need? So we quit. And so, like I said, I quit, but I didn't want to be away from it. And I didn't really want in the administrative part anymore. I really just wanted to focus on what we could do around our area, and still keep the lifestyle that we keep, and that's what our Shoot 2 bull ridings are.
So one of the things you talked about, and we're going to come back to the bull ridings, one of the things we talked about, and I didn't know, you were an editor of the Rodeo News.
Correct.
So take us back. When was the very first publication of the Rodeo News? What year, what month?
So it would have been back early 60s. So a lot of people don't know, but Loretta Lynn and Moody Lynn owned part of Rodeo News. Bruce Lurkey and Sheila owned part of Rodeo News, and Chuck Smith and his wife owned part of Rodeo News. And there was one other big person that owned it, I heard the other day, but I knew when Loretta and Mooney owned it. They kind of faded out of it, but Bruce and them still had an end to it. But I knew Chuck from being a little kid, hanging around and stuff, and was going to rodeos, and Chuck offered me the job of Rodeo News editor, and my wife and I were newlyweds, and I'd just graduated college. She still liked a year of college down in Stephenville, and we were trying to decide what we were going to do in life. And I knew I was going to rodeo, and I remember being in the 9th grade, and they said, if you're going to go to college, you need to take algebra. And I said, I'm not going to college. I'm going to make my living riding bulls. How silly was I? I got in college and struggled through algebra. So we went to Madison Square Garden one weekend, a 41-hour trip back. I came back, took an algebra test, flunked it miserably, dropped out of algebra in college. But Bruce Lurkey had offered me a job with Longhorn Rodeo. I was real interested in that because, wow, there's never been a better rodeo production company than Longhorn Rodeo. May never be. Just nobody can even get close to what Bruce did. And Bruce and I were really good friends when we did board meetings. When I was the bull riding director, I was the editor of Rodeo News too, and me and Bruce used to stay in the same room together and just shared stuff, talked a lot, and he and I were very good friends. And so Bruce offered me to come work for him. I really wanted to do that, but I just wasn't as comfortable doing it. He wanted us to come then, and my wife still liked a year of college, and he said she can come up here and finish college, and I said no, I want her to finish there. And so we kind of turned Bruce down. Chuck offered me a deal at Rodeo News, and we took it. And so we moved to Oklahoma for a couple of years and did the Rodeo News deal. I think it re-energized Chuck a lot. He had got into, really just turned into a job. He was doing a lot of side printing because he had the big printing press and stuff. So he would do a lot of side jobs, rodeo programs or kolache festivals. I mean, there was all kind of stuff he was doing, and I think it re-energized him because I was out there at the rodeos representing Rodeo News. So when I wrote the articles, I was there. It wasn't just somebody sending something in. And I've been an artist my whole life, so a lot of the artwork I kind of updated and redid some of it that people don't know in there. My signature's hidden on them, but I did a lot of the artwork for Chuck, and I redid all the line art for like the rule book and stuff like that. Again, just because I wanted to do it. But I learned a great deal working there at Rodeo News with Chuck. I loved that job. It was so much fun, and I got to go talk about rodeo all the time. Like I said, Chuck had a bunch of women working there, And when I got there, we'd go to lunch. Chuck got to talk about rodeo. And he got to talk about bucking horses and bulls and just all kind. And like I say, I think it re-energized Chuck, and he really took me under his wing. And I went all over the country, and he allowed me to be gone, because he knew I was going to IRA rodeos. And it was an absolute wonderful job that I love. I went back by there the other day and just saw Janet and Tommy and all them. And Tommy said, "Man, take anything you want." And I said, "Are you kidding me?" So I got me some rodeo news stuff, got me some old signs, and I got my packet out of there of pictures. I got Dad's packet. I got Glenn's packet, Glenn Bird's. I got a bunch of rodeo pictures from there that they just said, when Tommy said, "Take whatever you want," I was like, "Back the truck up. I'll take it all." But rodeo news was a great time in my life where I was just starting my professional rodeo career. We had the Jeep sponsorship where they sent us all over the country. Plus we were doing rodeo news and riding. And literally, I tell people, my wife and I, we were 25 years old, newlyweds, and we were making more money than we could spend, and we could spend money. And because we were getting paid on either side, Jeep was paying for me to rodeo everywhere, and I was getting paid at rodeo news. I get to keep whatever I want, and so it was a great time in my life, great time early in my rodeo career.
Tell me about Chuck Smith.
Man, an innovator in rodeo. He really knew a lot about rodeo organization. He got with him and J.O. Cravens and that Oklahoma group got together and just designed the IRA, and designed what it should be. And gosh, I think our pinnacle was in the early 80s when we had Madison Square Garden. Steve Gander had started World's Toughest Rodeo, and him and Bruce were just dueling it out as far as big rodeos. And they both came to Texas, which was just unheard of. Bruce had San Antonio, he had Houston, Steve had Fort Worth and Houston at the same time. I mean, just big rodeos. I think we set money earned records that year for money earned for the year because of those rodeos. And we were just in a real big heyday in the mid-'80s. Ronnie Williams got to be, after he retired, got to be the field rep. And Ronnie Williams built the IPRA up to what it was. Him going out there, spending years on the road, meeting with the regional associations, co-sanctioning. Again, what getting the regional associations does is you get their top talent as well. And then they begin to come over to some of our rodeos, and again, the talent level's raised. And that's what really does it for rodeo is, when your peers rise up, you rise up. You've heard this, surely, that you travel with champions. That's the only way you can do. I was by far the least best guy in my rig, and I meant for it to be that way because I wanted them guys that could really ride and do, and I aspired to be with them. I remember going with some world champions early in my career, and man, we just left every rodeo, and they were winning everything, and I went, I want in that conversation. I don't want to be left out. It made me ride better. So Chuck Smith was just, again, he'd been done riding for a long time, but started Rodeo News. By the way, Rodeo News was the best rodeo publication ever out there, ever. It put a face to the IPRA, and it showed in what we did. Chuck was a stickler for, for editing and stuff, and again, the pictures. Tom Abshire, who was the president of the IPRA, he had a real good picture of me at one of his rodeos with the Coca-Cola sign in the background. He wanted that on the cover. And I wanted it on the cover because it was a picture of me. But Chuck wouldn't do it because it wasn't a horizontal picture, it was a vertical picture, and it was vice versa. It was horizontal, not vertical, and that's what you had to have on the cover. So I respected Chuck a great deal. Again, not just because of what he did in rodeo, but because of who he was in rodeo. And his Mr. IPRA or Mr. IRA. You have to forgive me, I swap back and forth all the time. I grew up IRA.
Sure.
And that's all I knew it was.
Before they added the P.
Yeah, before we were professional. Like I say, I didn't ever look at anybody by what card they held in their pocket. It just didn't matter to me. I tell people, if you were taking my money, I knew who you were. So... But yeah, Chuck was where he couldn't travel around there toward the end of his career and our career together. But I think by proxy he was out there through me. I really do. And he had told me that. He said, "Man, you've changed our structure by you being out there and representing us out there," because they were kind of at that point removed from the IRA. because they just was kind of there. But when I got back out there and was out there with the Cowboys and all that, I brought some new photographers in that I met, and some guys that I befriended. Again, I needed their stuff to come in, and it was something that was lacking because nobody was out there going, hey, please help us out with this area. And so I was able to do that for Chuck. I like to think I helped it out a great deal. Again, leave it better than what I went in there for.
And how would you describe Chuck as a person?
Wow, which version do you know? He's a really soft-hearted guy when you got to know him. Again, a stickler for perfection. My son and my family get after me at our shows because I'm a stickler. I believe that presentation is paramount. When you showed up at our bull riding yesterday, you said, I'm at a professional event. You saw that. And my son finally said, you know what, we're Chute 2 Productions because of your stance on it. And I think the IRA was the IRA because of Chuck's stance on it. I think he knew it was professional. He knew the talent that was there. My gosh, we don't even go back and talk about 11-time world champion Ben Jordan. Nobody could beat Ben Jordan. I mean, he was great. Nobody beat Ben Jordan until my dad came along and beat Ben Jordan. And it was something that rocked the rodeo world that, oh my gosh, somebody beat Ben Jordan. Not in every event, but beat Ben Jordan. J.O. Craven's claim to fame is he was runner-up 11 times to the world championship to Ben Jordan. What a great accolade, So, but we don't go back to look at those. I mean, we talk about, Glenn Byrd. I mean, nobody was better than Glenn Byrd. My dad said when Glenn was on a cold streak, he won second.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. And so, the guru of bull riding of everybody is Gary LeFew. And I was in Las Vegas several years ago, and I went up to Gary and I said, hey, my dad's John Clark. And he said, John Clark, he said, him and Glenn Byrd used to come out here and take all of our money back to Texas. So well respected in all the ranks. But Chuck was that way. I think the IRA was what the IRA was because of Chuck. It was his heart and his desire. It was his idea. He started in it. Now, he couldn't have done it without the help of the Cravens family, the entire Cravens family. J.O., Mary, Jonna, Dana, all of them. And very influential part of the IRA, still is today. And you don't know how all those back roads go back down through there, and you go, oh, okay, you talked with Wes Ward yesterday and went, oh, J.O.'s your uncle. You keep saying Uncle J.O., right, yeah. So just, again, it started in Oklahoma and spread very well. I don't know if people remember, but we were probably the most strongest at one time in California. The West Coast, we were really strong. When I got in there in the early 80s, we were dominant east of the Mississippi. Wasn't much any other kind of rodeos but ours, but that was from Bruce and Steve Gander and them really being dominant over in the eastern part of the country. And the indoor rodeos, again, with the indoor rodeos, second to none. Absolutely second to none. By the way, in 1985, when it opened up, their current PRCA World Champion, Joe Beaver, made the IFR. And was at one time we had a token PRCA world champion at the IFR because they got into rodeos and made enough to win and make it to the IFR. I got off of Chuck, but the reason I got off of Chuck is because Chuck brought all those people in.
Okay.
It was because Chuck's vision of, and like I said, when you begin to develop something, stuff comes over from that.
Yeah.
He begins to develop this association that's pretty good.
Yeah.
We have a saying in rodeo that you got to pay your dues. When I got in the administrative part, I said, that's a fallacy. You shouldn't have to pay your dues for anything. We see faceless riders on faceless livestock, and we mark what they did that day. But there shouldn't be any pay your dues stuff. And I think that was Chuck's deal of, no, you shouldn't have to pay your dues. You're based on your merit. We're a judge sport, and so it's based on your merit. So as Chuck began to develop the IRA, with the help of all those around him, my business philosophy, I've had several businesses, not to be braggadocious, but we've been debt-free for about 12 years now, my wife and I, and we've had several businesses that's done very well for us, all rodeo-oriented businesses. And my business philosophy is Ross Perot. Don't know if you know who Ross Perot is. Ran for president.
Yes.
Started a company in his garage, and is worth $6 billion. Lives right over here by us. Ross Perot is worth $6 billion. Like him or not, he made it. But what he did is he surrounded himself with the right people. That's why when somebody gets to be president, he establishes a cabinet. When I was president of the IRA, that's what I did. I established me a cabinet. I had guys that I could call on that had been in the IRA back in the 60s, seen when it started. I went to people's places, homes, whatever, sit down with them and I said, educate me. Tell me where we came from and where we're at. We got to look back to know how to look forward. And so what I wanted to do was, again, what Chuck did, take it to heart and go, okay, how do we make it better? And that's what Chuck's whole goal was, is how do we make something better? It's good, but how do we make it better? And that's been my philosophy is, how do I do something better? Never quit learning. And I can tell you a story about my dad. When I was in high school, I had a pretty good career in high school, went to the National High School Finals, finished 17th in the nation. I won the Texas, which is pretty hard to do, especially even in high school. I can name off guys that you know had a big rodeo career that we rodeoed against, and you want me to do some of those?
I would love that.
I hate to name names.
That's okay. That's okay.
You know, I mean, I rode against, again, good friends of mine, Lane Foltine, Chuck Logue was the world champion in the PRCA, a number of those guys. But in high school, I was riding pretty good for a high school kid, you know, and riding in high school rodeos. And I remember riding a bull one Sunday afternoon. My dad was there, and big old muley brindle, and really bucked. Dad wasn't a preponderant of high school rodeo because all they gave was buckles or trophies. He was more of a money-winning guy. They finally changed that. Now kids can win money, which again, it's better now than it was for me then. But I rode a big brindle one day, and boy, he really bucked and just made a lot of rounds, jumped out of it. It hadn't been ridden, so when I rode him around, he jumped out of it, kind of scattered a little bit. And I just kind of monkeyed up, got over the top of him, make sure I make the whistle and get a score. I won the bull ride. I got a buckle. And we got in the truck, headed home, and Dad said, I thought you looked a little weak there at the end, you know, and just really criticized my ride. And I remember as a 17-year-old holding the buckle in my hand going, but I won the rodeo. Look, can you not, here, you hold this. And I didn't realize it until I got older, much older, that all I ever wanted to do with my rodeo career was to please my dad, period. Yeah, I wanted to be a world champion. Yeah, I wanted to be whatever. But my main goal was to please my dad. I thought he was the greatest that had ever been, and I wanted to please him. I'm going to get back to that story, but stories are stories. When people used to gather around, they would ask my dad, who's the greatest bull rider you've ever known? And before they got the sentence out, he would say, Glenn Bird's the greatest I've ever seen, ever. Dad taught Glenn. Don't know if anybody knows that, but Dad took Glenn from home and taught him. But he would always say Glenn Bird. And my goal in life was to say, one day when somebody asked my dad, who's the greatest he ever saw, he would say me. And when I was young and in high school, I never could please him. And it was frustrating, not to a bad point, but it was frustrating that I couldn't please him. And until I got a lot of age on me and looked back on it, I realized had I had pleased him then, I would have leveled off right there. But he knew there was more. And he kept digging for more. And he finally got more out of me. My greatest rodeo story is this. I went to the IRA has the all-region finals. I went to them the first year. I had gotten hurt real bad in 1989, had a bull flip over on me, broke my leg, my collarbone, and a bunch of stuff. And I just quit chasing. I just said, you know, we're going to go to the fun ones. And so I got involved in church. I started teaching. I got to be the youth pastor. And in 1992, I was trying to quit. I'd done it for a long time. I'd pretty well done what I was going to do. I made the national all-region finals. I thought, boy, here's the pinnacle. I'll ride there and get out. We went down there Thursday night. Started on Friday night, went down there Friday night. The news media was there. Jim Zinsser had a bunch of bulls there. Smokey Davis. It was a great show. It was just a finals rodeo. And he had the Bucking Bull of the Year there, 108 Iceman. And the news media was interviewing people, and they said, hey, what about Iceman? I said, look, he can make somebody's career, he can break somebody's career. He's not going to make my career. I'm on the out, but he could break mine, So the first round, I had his stablemate, a bull that if you'd have asked me before we started, could I ride him, if I'd have been honest, I'd have probably said, probably not a good chance. But my dad was there, and I pulled my rope. I ride left-handed. It was a right-hand delivery, so my dad's on the back of the chutes. This story has a story. In 1966, Bruce Lurkey had the Slits Challenge. You saw the pictures up in here. They challenged the 4 current world champions to ride number 2 White Lightning of Sloan Williams. It's a big Bramer bull that really bucked. And it was at Milwaukee. My mom said it was the coolest thing ever. Of course, back in the 60s, it was before challenges or bull events or anything. So each night they would have the world champions on the bucking chutes in their shaps, and they would spotlight them on the chutes. And they would do, here's John Clark, world champion, here's Glenn Bird, world champion, here's Red Duffin, world champion, here's Lloyd Burke, world champion. And each night of the rodeo, one of them had White Lightning. Glenn rode him and was, in 1966, he was 86 points on him. 1966, he was 86 points on him. Unheard of. I mean, today he'd have been 120, but 86 points on him. In Mexico, when the bullfighter fights the bull, people throw their hats in the arena, signifying, I believe you're the best. When Glenn rode White Lightning, Dad threw his hat in the arena. In 1966, threw his hat in the arena. And of course, all the guys threw it in thereafter. I mean, it was greatness. Dad had him one of the nights, I don't remember if it was the next night or what, rode him right to the whistle and throwed him off. My mom said if he had made another half second, Glenn's ride couldn't have touched him. That's what my mom told me. Mm-hmm. So fast forward to 40 years later, I'm at the National All-Region Finals. I ride this bull to Zinzers, and I spur him like a bareback horse. Whistle blows, I get off. I am just absolutely elated. I threw my hat, and my dad hugged me. And he leaned back. Sorry. This has been 30 years. He said, I don't care if I ever see you get on another one. That's the best I've ever seen it done. And so, years later, I was driving down the road late at night, going to rodeos and just riding bulls in my head, watching the moon. And I got to thinking about it, and I rode that bull again, And I thought, man, Dad hugged me, and he leaned back and he said, I don't care if I ever see you get on another one, that's the best I've ever seen it done. And I thought, what was Dad doing in the arena? And he'd bent over and picked up his hat.
Wow.
Wow. I'm going to let that sit there for a second. Because if you've ever had someone you looked up to, someone you wanted to make proud, then you know exactly what that story just did. That moment isn't about a buckle. It isn't even about a perfect ride. It's about the thing underneath all of it. Legacy, approval, and love. And that doesn't always come easy. That's why this conversation mattered. And this is only the beginning with Kelly Clark. We've got more coming, more stories, more history, more names, more places, and we're going to keep building this into a deeper series on Longhorn, the people behind it, the roads they ran, and the world that shaped modern rodeo. And if you want to see what I'm talking about, you can catch the Buckhorn reels on our BTC Facebook page. Trust me, the camera doesn't even catch half of it. Now, thanks for riding along with us. I'm Doug Simcox, and this is Beyond the Chutes. This is Beyond the Chutes as presented by Parasite System, helping vets save time, save money, and save pets. Before we wrap this up, one more thing. Beyond the Chutes is hitting the road in 2026, bringing the stories, the history, and the people of rodeo to the places where it all matters. We'll kick things off February 21st at the Kickback Ranch Cowboy Reunion in Raymer, Alabama, a gathering built on family, tradition, and real cowboy connection. And if Alabama is on your calendar, make Kickback Ranch your home base. Full hookup RV sites, cowboy cabins, cottages, wagon wheel suites, fishing lakes, trails, a swimming pool, and Cowboy Town. It's a place built for families, events, and bringing people together. Then we'll roll into the 3rd annual King Brothers Rodeo Reunion on May 23rd. Another stop where rodeo stories don't fade, they get passed on. We've got something for all you rodeo road warriors out there. A good friend of ours, Mr. Stan Cromlish, has just a thing to make those long hauls a little smoother.
Hey, Rodeo Road Warriors! Stan Cromlish here from the Wandering Gypsy RV Life Podcast. Ever had a trip go sideways, faster than a bronc out of the chute? Grab my book, Rolling Smooth, How to Enjoy the RV Life Without Losing Your Cool. Packed with real RV stories, hard-won lessons, and a few laughs at my expense. Listen on Audible. Snag a copy at WanderingGypsyRVLife.com and catch the Wandering Gypsy RV Life podcast for more wild tales from the road. Don't just ride, roll smooth.
We're also proud to be supporting our BTC athletes during the new 2026 rodeo season. Raymond Hotstetler, Eli Hirschberger, and Iowa breakaway roper Aubrey Wolf. These are competitors doing it the right way, on the road, in the practice pen, and under the lights. And we'll follow these BTC cowboys and cowgirls on their journey all season long. This episode is also brought to you by Simcox & Company. Cedar Falls, Iowa, 4 generations strong. Deb, Tommy, Eli, and Troy. Great haircuts, looking good, and even better conversation. From the road, from the arena, and from the people who live this life, these stories matter. This is Beyond the Chutes.